I wanted to second videotape by way of a public service announcement. Um, you may be aware that the federal government has been working on a bunch of acts that none of which we necessarily need, uh, versus a number of acts that we absolutely do need, but they will never actually take up. One of the acts that is utterly unnecessary, excuse me, still a little congested, comes from the South Carolina 1st District Representative, Ms. Nancy Mace. And Nancy Mace has introduced the Safe Shelters Act, colloquially termed. Now, Safe Shelters, which I'm going to put a post down below for you to respond to and sign the petition about, suggests, well, it doesn't suggest, states it flat out, that if you are somebody convicted of a sex offense, notice how I said somebody convicted of a sex offense, as opposed to what they like to say, sex offender, because as we know, a number of people have been convicted, many, many thousands, who actually didn't do anything um, to create any kind of a sex offense. But in this case, Nancy Mace wants to restrict anybody convicted of a sex offense from an emergency shelter in time of national or local or regional crisis, hurricanes, floods, national emergencies, civil defense type issues, all of it. Now, this is very similar with an important codicil to the Virginia one that was passed a couple of years ago, pressed through by Republicans and anxious Democrats who want to keep the little majorities. And this allows people convicted of a sex offense to enter a shelter with the proviso under penalty of, I think, a felony. I think it's a class 6 felony. If you don't immediately go to the center director and let them know that you have been convicted of a sex offense, because there's nothing a very harried, busy, overworked, and overwrought center director wants much more than anything else than to have somebody run up and say, oh, by the way, here's another problem. I am required by law to notify you that I am a sex offender under law. Nothing they love more than that. And of course, the number of people who actually commit sex offenses a second time is very low. And then the number of people who actually commit a sex offense of the same sort, involving a child or a vulnerable teen or an adult, is fairly small, although you get the idea from the press and their splashy headlines that everybody in the community is doing it. And of course, for every 20 or 30 of those, you get one or two talking the truth, which is most of the people who are doing these things are not people on dating sites or randos, but they're people in family situations, long-term trust situations with an individual. So they're not some random teacher, for example, but the coach that works carefully with the gymnastics person, uh, many, many hours a day because they're planning on going to the Olympics. Okay, that's where it happens. Also happens with vigilantes too. We're discovering, right? Or with cops. In other words, people who hide behind a badge or they hide behind some kind of privileged status. They're the ones that very often are the ones that get to look like heroes until many, many victims later we discover what they really are, which are predators. And interestingly enough, Nancy Mace is very concerned not about these people, but about the random, rare occurrence where this might happen. And that's why anybody convicted of a sex offense will be barred from going into an emergency shelter. They just have to fend for themselves out there. Of course, she doesn't have the same ire against murderers, car thieves, people who would steal babies and sell them, organ thefts, or other heinous crimes. It's simply people who have a sex offense on their record. Interesting. Now, of course, Nancy Mace has her own problems, as I've indicated. She is sex obsessed, as evidenced by the fact that she nearly missed her prayer breakfast one morning, and among all these religious notables, because she was having sex with her boyfriend, not husband, and she, of course, had to tell them about that as the reason why she was late. And of course, you got a few chuckles out of that one. Conveniently forgetting, of course, that they're at a prayer breakfast where earthly concerns are supposed to be the last thing they're interested in. But of course, Nancy Mace has proved herself over and over again to be a particular type of media whore, shall I say, who absolutely loves to get the MAGA attention. And she went from a fairly reasonable person early on to an absolutely unreasonable person, sniffling right up to Donald Trump and the others up there, like Elise Stefanik in New York and some others. I only mention this not because of partisanship. I actually have a lot of conservative leanings myself. I grew up in a small town, but because it's no matter where you find ridiculousness in any quarter, it should be called out. And so down below, I put the petition that I think NARSOL or AXOL is one of them has put out. The letter's already written. All you have to do is sign on to it, indicating your opposition to this unfair and unjust and heavily stigmatizing legislation that is designed to pull people down and not build them up. And so, for the individual liberties people, the people who believe in fairness and freedom and all the rest, this is something, of course, that they have no stomach for. And rule of law they will tell you about, but of course, there's a lot of places where they have absolutely bent the knee on that one, not to mention the next president of the United States, among others in their own midst. So it's very curious that they're honing in on somebody who, a group of people who cannot defend themselves, who has no political power, has no ability to fight back, and so who is reliant on the goodwill of others and keeping their nose clean because they are constantly under duress, constantly being watched. As I've said before, if you get a new job and you get a new work email and you don't tell them in the state patrol or whatever compliance office, you are liable for a felony in many cases. That's simply ridiculous. So it's just one more attempt to put another nail in the coffin to marginalize another group of people that can't defend themselves, all so that they can look good and strong and brave. But when they're faced with actual constituencies outside of their cameras fighting back, they really don't know what to do. They tend to hide. They cancel meetings, they cancel outings, they cancel uh, virtual meetings, whatever it is. They're cowards, craven to the end. So please sign this petition saying no to Nancy Mace and no to the people who want to make it more difficult for no reason. And maybe start a new petition asking her to actually do something. They've just raised the debt ceiling after the $8 trillion that they put forward under the Trump administration, $8 trillion in debt. I wonder why they did that since they argued against President Biden doing that. Maybe it's because they're not just interested in not paying our bills, the bills that they have caused, but they are interested in raising more and more debt. Maybe that's what they ought to be focused on, reducing that debt by maybe they could roll back the tax cuts on the very, very wealthy. That would be a very worthy thing that they could do. And it would help 99% of the American population, even the higher income earners. So again, vote against this safe shelters bit, showing your vote by going on and signing this petition. This is Norman Michaelation for the 19th day of December 2024. Have a nice day.